All right. How's everyone doing out there today? Got a very special guest for us. David Butow, the photographer, is back with us again, and he's been covering the LA wildfires. So, very, very excited to have David on the podcast today. Today, we're pretty much just exclusively going to talk about the wildfires. David's been photographing them, he's been out there witnessing all of this, which is incredible. But for those people who want more of a background into David and his work, he's been on podcast number 10 and podcast number 68. So if you wanted to go back and see what's going on with David, that's where you can find it. Now, David, you're in the studio.
Mm, good to see you, Ryan.
It's good to see you, man. I'm glad you haven't been hurt or injured in any of this chaos. You've been covering the wildfires the last couple weeks.
Same, right? Right.
It's not great. I mean, I can't wait to kind of get into this with you. So when did the wildfires actually start? I think it was like last week Tuesday.
It was Tuesday, and it was. I think they started it at about 10:30 in the morning on the west side, so somewhere around Pacific Palisades, which is for those of you who don't live in Los Angeles. It's kind of it's right on the coast, and it's kind of between Santa Monica and Malibu. So it is part of the city of Los Angeles, but it's its own neighborhood that has its own name. It's a very upscale area. A lot of celebrities live there, a lot of people in show business. And it's kind of in the hills. I mean, some of it's sort of flat, but the terrain is very, very much part of the Santa Monica Mountains there. So that kicked off from what I heard about 10:30 in the morning last Tuesday. And I found out about it around midday. I think I was watching, I don't remember. I just had my computer up and I saw something somewhere about it. And so, I watched it for about 20 or 30 minutes to see if it was going to sort of be a big deal. And I'm not really in the habit of going out and covering every single wildfire that happens in LA because there are a lot of them. And, most of them don't turn out to do much damage. So I was watching this one a little bit, and it was clear that it had the potential anyway to be bad. And so I just got a couple of cameras together quickly, and I drove out to, I think I drove down Sunset Boulevard was where I started initially, or went around to Santa Monica to Chautauqua. I don't remember exactly, but right around where Sunset sort of ends at the PCH is where I started. And yeah, well, I guess we'll see some of these pictures, but
It's devastating watching this. Like
Mm.
I'm new to LA, right? Like I haven't really kind of bought into this whole like natural disasters are kind of common in this part of the world. And they kind of are, right? We've had earthquakes here before. We've had natural disasters here. We've had riots, before human-made disasters. And but watching the community kind of like try to deal with this has been really painful, like to watch, like just the devastation and the loss.
right, the scale of it is really what is kind of mind blowing. And I mean, like you said, I mean, the city is used to dealing with fires here and there, and sometimes you'll hear about a street or a few houses or a few businesses that get burned up in a fire. But this was the scale of this is still, I think, they're still calculating how bad it was, but we're talking about, thousands of houses and that many businesses probably. So,
So we're gonna get into your photos in a little bit, but just so we can lay this out. So the wildfires in LA County, I think at one point there were 5 or 6 fires. Like there's been some in Pasadena, which is out on the east side. Obviously the Pacific Palisades and Malibu is on the west side, right on the coast. And then at one stage Wednesday night, I was actually quite close to evacuating because we had the fires actually show up in Runyon Canyon,
mhm.
which is like way too close for comfort if you live in Beverly Hills or something like that. So that was really scary.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I live not too far from you. And so, yeah, it was one of those situations where, given having this was 2 or 3 days after the main fire started, but seeing how quickly those spread, the initial ones, you just don't know. And then another fire kicks off. And yeah, it's just so unpredictable. And the winds were insane. I mean, that's what really drove these things was what we call Santa Ana winds, which is normally the breeze when you're here in Los Angeles, the breeze blows from the ocean. It's a humid, cool breeze blowing from the ocean inland. But now and then the wind patterns change. You've got a low pressure area right on the coast, and then that draws wind in from the east, so from the desert. So it's a hot wind, and it's called the Santa Ana winds, and these were kicking up like almost like hurricane force. I mean, I think sometimes gusting close to 100 miles an hour, and it felt like that even just driving around here before we got out to the coast. You could tell that it was really bad, and that that just causes these embers to blow a couple of miles away. Just a single ember. So that's what makes these fires so fast
Mhm.
and so dangerous.
And obviously, there's been a lot of chat in the news and chat, on social media and stuff like that about like what caused the fires and, different levels of preparedness and all of that. But I don't want to get into that with you. I'd really just like to go through your images and really get an understanding of what you saw on the ground.
Great, because yeah, I haven't been reading the news that closely, and so it's hard for me to have a sense of what sort of answers people are coming up with this point. And yeah, I don't really want to delve into that, but I'm happy to tell you about my experiences. So
That'd be great. So,
yeah,
so this is a little bit complicated today, but I'm excited that we're going to do this. So now I can just set up one of your photos here and bring it across. So what are we looking at here?
so that's Sunset Boulevard, and that is pretty close to where it dead ends at the Pacific Coast Highway. So just less than a third of a mile, let's say, from the ocean. And we're going to see these more or less in chronological order. So it'll sort of relate to my own experience being there. So this is one of the first things I saw kind of when basically I got out of my car and I started walking up Sunset a little bit. And I can see, the fires move from the hills down close to Sunset. And then you see these cars kind of driving through the smoke, basically to escape.
It's so that's crazy to me. Like that's crazy that you're driving along Sunset Boulevard, this globally iconic street,
Yeah.
and the fire is actually coming right down on you. So that's basically where that photo is kind of right where Santa Monica hits the Pacific Coast Highway. Is that correct?
Pretty close, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a little bit sort of northwest of where Santa Monica,
Mhm.
merges, yeah, I think it might technically be Pacific Palisades, I'm not sure, but, for those of you, who are watching who don't live in LA, Sunset Boulevard runs all the way from downtown Los Angeles to the coast, so that's about, I don't know, maybe 15 miles or so as the crow flies, and so it snakes its way through, off of downtown Chinatown, through Hollywood, into West Hollywood, through Beverly Hills, and then finally, sort of down, through Santa Monica and the Palisades there, through Brentwood,
Mhm.
you know, um,
Which is
so
another lovely neighborhood for people to live in. So this is like this is prime real estate. Like you're on the edge of the Pacific Ocean. It's like some of these homes have gorgeous views over the water.
right.
Like this is not, this is a nice part of town to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is probably some of the most expensive real estate in the United States,
Mhm.
for sure. So,
That's crazy.
yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one here. Uh, there we go. What are we looking at
So
here?
this is a woman who was just running down the hill, I don't remember, where she started, but, again, it's all very fast. I mean, I just jumped out of my car and just started taking pictures immediately, and I could see that you could just tell that things were out of control. I mean, there were fire crews around, but it was just too much and too fast for them to it's not like there was a single line of defense. I mean, it was the fires were popping up all up and down the street, all up and down as you'll see a little bit later, sort of the coast. And so it's just impossible for them to stop it at
Mhm.
that point. Really, the only thing that stopped it really was the Pacific Ocean. So,
That's wild. So
yeah.
so you get out of your car and I mean, are you running like uphill like into the Palisades neighborhoods? Like is that where you were heading because that's where the action like was? I mean, and at that stage when I mean, this is day 1 too. Like you don't even know what's going on really. You're kind of walking up there. People are running down the hill. You're going into it. Like were you completely surrounded on like all 3 sides with fire?
Not really. It's not like there was a wall of fire around me or anything. I think I mostly noticed it as I was up off sort of towards, I guess you would say it was the north, sort of my left as I was walking up Sunset. And like I said, I don't, um, I don't go and chase every brush fire that crops up in Los Angeles. I actually haven't really done it in many years. When I was first working here as a newspaper photographer, so, in the late '80s, early '90s, I did go to more of those fires because could be a local story, right? It might just be an LA story, so I'd get assigned to go cover a brush fire somewhere, but I hadn't really done much of it since then, and so, I'd done a little bit of it, I think, when I was living in Northern California, but that's about it. So I actually don't have, like, the proper fire gear. A lot of my colleagues have this. They do this more often. So they have coats, they have, fire retardant hats and whatever. I don't have that stuff. I have a good pair of, like, tactical goggles that I wear, and that's pretty much, it.
So
So
so what were you wearing at this stage?
well, I think I was just wearing blue jeans and a cotton jacket because you
That's so
don't
American.
well, yeah, but you don't wanna wear synthetic fabrics too, right? Because if an ember falls on it, it'll just melt it. So yeah, cotton is your friend in that situation, yeah. So
Okay.
I was going up, and we'll see as in the next 2 or 3 pictures, I think we'll sort of see, within a few minutes, I, saw a fire crew, so I kind of caught up with them.
Mhm. Let's see. Let's switch to the next one here. Oh,
And
walk off.
these are cars, this is Sunset, so these are cars that had been abandoned. So at some point, people were fleeing, this was before I got there, but they were fleeing down the hill, basically going west away from the fire. And I guess I don't really know exactly what happened, but there was such a traffic jam or things got too congested that
Mm.
they weren't able to move in their cars. So people just got out and abandoned their cars and then ran away.
And you can see the fire ripping in your photo in the back right-hand corner almost.
Yeah, that's right. So this particular area is not that dense with houses. There were a few structures there. There's a school kind of nearby, close to where I'm standing. A little, just maybe a couple 100 meters down the hill. There's a gas station. There's a smoothie place. A few other little businesses like that were intact when I got there, but it was clear that the bulk of the fire was kind of just like up in the hills and was making its way down this way. So I walked up a little bit further.
Now, I mean, like, most people think, like, because hot air rises, and because the higher you go up, into the Palisades and the Santa Monica Mountains, the higher you get, the stronger the wind would be, right? So most people, I guess, would assume, like, the wind and the fire would kind of take it up, but it came from the Palisades down, like, right to the ocean and just destroyed all those homes and stuff like that. Like, I've never seen a fire, like, I've been watching it on TV and stuff like that. I've never seen a fire, like, go downhill and just wipe out all these coastal mansions. Like, it's ridiculous.
Right, and I think it's because of the winds. There are a lot of valleys of different sizes, there on the west side, and so, you'll find that some of these little depressions can create like a wind tunnel if the
Mhm.
wind is blowing again from east to west primarily, and it's very hot wind, and it's extremely strong.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, it was as strong as any winds I've ever felt living here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's exactly the worst possible condition. And everything is really dry. Has been dry because we haven't had rain in the city in many months. Maybe there were some little drizzles here and there a couple months ago, but other than that, it's been really very unusually dry for the last several months. So you put all that together, and that's bad news.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one here. What do we got here?
Yeah, so I pulled my car into a parking lot, um, and, there were about maybe 5 or 6 cars in there, and as I was making my way up the hill, I ran into a couple of colleagues, and one of them said, "Hey, did you park down in that little lot?" I said, "Yeah, why?" And, he said, "Well, the fire's moving very close to there. I would move your car." So, at some point, I did, go back down there, and
So
fortunately
that's not your car.
it's not my car. Fortunately, my car was but it wasn't that far away. So,
Mm.
again, it's one of those things that can be a very close call between, you know, uh, getting out with some good luck and having a complete disaster.
Well, it's terrifying because, like, you have to think, like, fire at its most basic is completely uncontrollable and terrifying, right? And then you add, like, what, 100-mile-an-hour winds?
Right.
So for people who are watching, outside of the United States, that's like 160 kilometers an hour of wind just ripping through this fire, sending all these, like you said, these embers, they're just being spread all over the place. And if they just catch one thing, then the whole thing goes up. Like,
That's right, and so you'll see later, I mean, I think there are a couple of pictures, where you can see there's some houses there might be a perfectly intact house next to a house that got completely destroyed, and so it's hard to know exactly what happened, but that is the case. You can just get one ember that gets into a house somehow, just under the roof or something, and it's just enough to catch the whole thing on fire.
terrifying. Okay, here we go. What do we got next? Okay.
Right, so this is the first fire crew that I came across, and these are actually, uh women who are, incarcerated who volunteered for that job, the ones in the orange, and then they're with the county. I think this Los Angeles County, maintains people on staff all the time, and then they also have these volunteer, firefighters.
Mhm.
So, that's what we're seeing here. So, up on the left of the picture is a house that's caught fire, but it's smoky, but this picture gives you a rough idea of what the terrain is like. You can see there's sort of a second hill in the back, and a lot of these houses are kind of nestled in the hills, so the properties might be pretty large. So in this particular neighborhood, the houses are not very densely packed together,
Mhm.
but you can see they're completely surrounded by trees and by bushes and all this kind of stuff that very easily can catch on fire.
So that's why, like, a lot of celebrities, I guess, like to live out there is because you get these larger properties than you would get in like Beverly Hills and stuff like that.
Yes.
And it's like your neighbors are further away and the
That's right,
is
exactly, and it feels much more rustic. So I was on a street, a few days after this, that, I mean, more celebrities that I can remember right now have properties there, and they don't all live there full time,
Mhm.
but they do have houses there and sometimes multiple structures as part of their property. But yeah, it feels very rustic. When you're in there, it's almost like you're out in the country or something. So yeah. Even though you're really in the middle of Los Angeles. Well, not the middle, but you're definitely in the city of LA. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's wild. And I mean, when you rucked up and joined this fire crew, where that photo was, they just kind of welcomed you and said, "Hey, come with us," or were they trying to get you to go back down the hill?
No, no, it was no problem. It wasn't even a discussion. And it was quick. I was probably only with them for 10 minutes, maybe. So, yeah. Um,
That's wild. All right,
right.
let's get to the next one here.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay, so, right, so basically what happened, so I photographed on the first day, on Tuesday, for an hour or something like that, and then it got dark, and I was literally, like, out of batteries. I didn't have all my stuff with me. I had sort of run out of the house, not really knowing if it was gonna be a big deal or not. So, I just decided to go home and regroup, and then the next morning, I got up about 4 o'clock, and I set off for the same place, basically. So I got back on Sunset Boulevard, and the picture that we're looking at now is, I think, the first picture I took that morning. So there is a house in there somewhere that got burned up,
Jeez.
but we're looking at a fence right on Sunset. Um, and I mean, one of the spooky things is that um, there were, I think, initially, and when I came across this scene, I don't even remember if I saw any police cars at that point, and I don't think I saw any fire crews at all at
Mm.
that point. So you're kind of, like, just out there, and and there's nobody around, and I drove a little bit further, and then I saw a few police cars kind of, like, in an intersection, but I had no problem just driving right to where this was.
But that's terrifying though that, like, you're out there, you're on your own. You said you didn't have the most up to date like fire retardant clothing and stuff like that. But you're right next to this fire that's just cooking. Like that had to be like, could you feel the heat coming off that thing? Like that must have just been terrifying because if the wind switches on you, that can come right across the road.
It could. I mean, it is hot, and so it's sort of like, I take a few pictures and then keep going, right? And so, there was a sense of like I'm standing kind of in the middle of the street, and so I feel sort of protected in the sense that I know the fire is not gonna burn right up to me, and so I'm trying to pay attention to what the immediate danger might be. And it's odd because it does seem like when you look at some of these pictures and other people's pictures or TV footage or people's Instagram videos or whatever it is, that it would be incredibly scary being right next to some of these fires. But it doesn't, oddly, it doesn't necessarily feel that way because it's sort of something is burning and it's not really necessarily spreading around on the ground, um, right where you are. But
So I mean, as a photographer, and you've been doing this for decades, at the highest levels. And we actually met during a natural disaster in China in 2008,
that's right.
which we talked about in our first meeting.
Mm.
But like, you know, where do you see yourself as, just grabbing your cameras and running into disaster? I mean, and how safe did you feel doing that versus, the earthquakes that we covered together in China or any other fire or situations that you'd been in?
Well, as I said, I have had some experience covering these fires, not nearly as much as many of my colleagues who do it multiple times a year. But I have a little bit of a sense of it. And so I'm the type of work I do these days, I'm not really covering much what you would call local news. I'm sort of paying more attention to something that might develop into a national story. So that's really what drew me to this particular event.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think, after the first night, um, yeah, on Tuesday, photographing for an hour or two, whatever it was, I sent my pictures to an agency that I work with called Redux Pictures, which is in New York. And so what they do is they put the pictures on their website, and then they alert their clients that they have these news pictures coming in. So it's an agency that handles all different kinds of photography, portraiture and features and all that, but they also do this kind of breaking news. So, professionally speaking, that's my mindset is now, okay, I've shot these pictures. It's going to turn into a national story. So get my pictures out and then go back early the next morning and then just see how this thing is shaping out.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, for people out there who don't really know, like there's photographers that are ambulance chasers who wake up every day and just chase, the story of the day and who are, shooting to get their pictures in the local newspapers and stuff like that. And then there's maybe people like you and like me, like back in the day is we kind of craft bigger stories, longer stories, and maybe things that are a little bit more thought out and try to like build some kind of narrative around that. So the fact that this is not like your everyday job, you just happen to live in LA and this shit just started happening.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
And you just got to cover it because like how can you not? Like the damage and the chaos and the loss of property and stuff like that is just out of this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And at some point, it becomes, you realize that it's not just a local event, right? That it's really like people around the country are paying attention to this. And it's it was hard to tell at that point early on Wednesday morning, but the scale of this turned out to be really a historical event.
Hmm.
And so, there's the way I think about doing photography now, I've sort of, in the last several years, it's been a little bit more in my consciousness is to take pictures and then, oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Such bad form.
No worries.
Take pictures in, to get them out for the news media right away, but also thinking things in the historical context. So that I'm thinking about pictures that are going to be interesting, not just that day, but weeks, months, years from now as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw that specifically on your, on the January 6th photography and on your photography, the Brink, like the build up to Trump's
Mhm.
election win, that your book that you came out with. We
Mhm.
talked about that in your first meeting. So yeah, like you definitely kind of aim for photographing thing like the Republican National Convention. We talked about that too on the
Mhm.
podcast a couple months ago. So you're really trying to hone in on these like groundbreaking moments that people are going to remember kind of forever.
Right, and in some ways, right. I mean, it's interesting to do that kind of work with that approach, and I also feel very privileged, really, to have a chance to go, in the case of politics, and to have seen all these events up close and to document it in a way that hopefully somebody, 100 years from now is going to going to appreciate. There's something about, the pictures that will sort of take them in to that mood and to that scene and give them a sense of what this time was like, in the U.S. and in this case in California.
Yeah. Well,
So
this picture's terrifying. I mean, you could like you gave the fire and these trees that are just melting in front of you a real personality. Like that looks terrifying.
yeah, no, it's really it's horrible to watch because behind that was somebody's house.
Yeah.
No,
Okay, let's go on to the next one here. Oh, Jesus.
right?
And this is all kind of around the same area.
Yeah, it is right.
Oh my God.
Close by. Yeah.
And
So
and were you weren't in danger when you were shooting these?
I mean, not really. I mean, I don't think so. Not that much. If it seems like something is getting out of control, then you get in your car and you leave. And so that's one of those general things that, right, if you've come by your own car, if you've traveled there by your own car, then you always want to keep track of where that is and maybe not get too far away from it in case you need to get out in a hurry.
I think that's sage advice. Okay, let's head over here to the next one. Oh man. So
Right.
is this still that Wednesday morning you're still shooting?
Right. So this is the Wednesday morning. So then I got into a neighborhood in Pac Palisades, and there was no there was no one preventing me from going in. I don't even think I have press passes that I show, which I'll talk about later in terms of access.
Mhm.
But I don't even think I needed to show those to anyone to get into this neighborhood. So I was there, let's say, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, something. And then I waited, I took pictures when it was dark, but mostly I was really waiting for dawn to break just to get some ambient light
Mhm.
so that you could sort of see better what was happening.
Yeah.
Because if you're photographing a fire at night, like those first couple, 3 pictures, basically almost all you can see is flames, right? Just because the fire is so bright. And in order to get the proper exposure, everything else is going to be really, really dark, even though with your eyes, maybe you can see things a little bit better. But then as the sun, starts to come up a little bit, you have a better sense of what the scale of this whole thing is. And that's, the next hour or two of experiencing that was, you know, heartbreaking and sort of, mind boggling.
Well, this one's terrifying because that's actually a chimney we're looking at, right? Like that's someone's fucking living room. Like
Yeah.
just and the whole house just melted around it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll say, I mean, one of the things about doing these kind of pictures is that if you're just at the ground level, um, it's impossible to show the scale of it. It
Mhm.
just because, beyond this house where that chimney is, there's another house. And then beyond that, there's a house and a house and a house and a house, and it's all burned up. So this is a part of Pacific Palisades that's a little bit more flat, and the houses are a little bit more, I wouldn't say they're densely packed, but they don't have the same big, sort of yards and property around them
Mhm.
like some of the other houses that we were talking about and that we'll show later. So this particular neighborhood, which there's streets that start with A and go through the alphabet, so they're sort of informally known, this neighborhood, as alphabet streets. So that's where this is. It's kind of right off of Sunset. Pretty, not too far from the PCH.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I was there for a few hours and that morning, the first morning after the fires.
And what was the wind like that morning? I mean, like, because for people who spend a lot of time out in nature, we know the wind always kicks up late afternoon and evening, and then dies off in the morning. But for this fire to really be cooking it, it really needed to kind of keep blowing all night and all through the next day, which it did, didn't
It
it?
it did. Yeah, it was pretty windy that morning. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
All right, let's go to the next one here. Oh wow,
we can show a few of these, I think.
just melted cars.
Yeah, I mean,
And look at all the little fires burning in the background. Like they're everywhere. It just seems like there's like 100 little fire bombs out there, just all melting.
yeah, and it's I was thinking about
Oh,
this
geez.
that you see a lot of pictures of cars, like of burned up cars, and I take those just like everyone else, and sometimes I get tired of that. Oh, it's a car, it's another burned up car. But one of the reasons that we end up taking these kind of pictures is that a car is the only thing that's still identifiable after a whole house is burned up.
Mhm.
I mean, these houses, they catch on fire and the fire never gets put out. I mean, once it gets to the point that the house is lost, even if there's a fire crew nearby, they're not going to put it out because they have a million other things to do. And there are all these other houses that haven't really caught fire yet that are vulnerable. So the crews prioritize those houses. But in this case, this is whatever time the sun comes up, 6 o'clock or something. This is right around that time. And there were no fire crews in this neighborhood. I didn't see a single one at that point because most of the houses were either destroyed or on fire already.
So I love this timeline a little bit. So you're sitting at home working Tuesday, and something pops up on this computer or the news or social media or whatever, and you're like, "Oh, wildfires, Pacific Palisades, interesting. Let's go have a look." And then you come back the next morning at like 4 a.m. and it's already gone.
Yes.
I'm looking at your photos right now, and in the time it took you to like go back and regroup, I'm just trying to think of like for the victims, right? For the people who lost their homes. Like you went out there when things were starting to happen, then you went back, regrouped, and then you went back out like a couple hours later in the middle of the night, like 4 a.m. or whatever, and it was already gone.
Yes, and that's one of the things about this particular fire is that it just happened so fast. So basically all this damage was done that night. And then as we'll talk about on Wednesday, so the second day of the fires, where I was on the west side in Pac Palisades, and that's when the Eaton fire, which was in Altadena, which is just north of Pasadena, that's when that really kicked off and burned a lot of houses. So I missed that day entirely on that side because I was on the west side.
Yeah.
But yeah, so here's another picture basically from, early in the morning. As you can see, it's starting to get lighter.
The one thing I see in this photo here. Oh, sorry. Let me just bring that back. Yeah, I'm producing a lot today. The one thing I see here is just how much the wind is ripping on those trees up in
Yeah, that's
in that
right.
top in the top middle of the frame. Like that's like those trees are bending.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's head over to the next one here. Oh wow.
Yeah, so this was, I was just driving down the street and I saw this guy and I took a few frames of him. And then I caught up with him, drove up to him, or he walked up to me. I can't remember. And I asked him if he needed any help. And he was trying to get to his house, which was at the top of Chautauqua, which is the name of the street in this neighborhood. So I gave him a ride up there, and he didn't know if his house was still standing, and he was pretty fearful that it had been destroyed. I think before he got up there, based on what he had seen that was happening to his neighborhood, but he didn't know for sure until he saw it, and in fact, his house had been completely burned out. So
And this is Wednesday morning. So like, it's not like he went back 2 or 3 days later. Like he went back like 12 hours after the fire started, and everything was already gone.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's
So that was very sad to take him up there and to see. And he was kind of just on autopilot and was just sort of taking videos of the whole thing. And then I spent maybe 10 or 15 minutes with him and then left.
Let's head on to the next.
So again, a lone figure. That's one of the eerie things about doing something like this. And you and I have, we met during the earthquake in China, and I can't remember if we met in Beichuan or somewhere near there
I
or where it
think
was.
I think it was Beichuan because
Is it?
that's where the quake lakes were, right? And that's where we had that emergency that day where we had to evacuate because of the
Yes,
quake lakes.
that's
And I think
right.
that was in Beichuan.
That's right. That was, yeah, exactly. And so one of my distinct, I don't know if you have this sort of recollection or feeling about it, but one of my distinct memories about that is just how eerie it was, particularly on the first morning that I walked into Beichuan. You have a whole town, and it wasn't a small town, and there were some tall buildings there that had been mostly destroyed, and there's almost no one around. So you're walking through this scene of devastation, which looks like some kind of, you know, movie set in apocalyptic times, but there's almost nobody there, and that's how it felt also being in this neighborhood in Pacific Palisades on Wednesday.
Just quiet, like all the life had just been sucked out
Yeah,
of it.
exactly. And you're just living and you're just, you're in the middle of something that's just a completely new reality to where it was 24 hours before.
Yeah.
You know,
This is wild. Okay, let's head over to the Next one here. Oh, wow, you got inside one of the buildings on this one.
Right. For I guess for all of Wednesday, I was mostly in this neighborhood, and some things were still on fire, something there was still smoldering. The air, as you can see in this picture, was very thick, and so it was even very hard to get. You could kind of see it with your eyes, but it was hard to get a sense in a photograph of what the scale of the devastation, because you just couldn't see that far, you know. Um, but yeah, that's what I did.
Did you have a mask at least, or were you like breathing in all this fumes and all this kind of? Because like people have been talking about how deadly the fumes have been, and we've been lucky, I think, here in this part of the neighborhood, like West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, because it looks like most of the smoke is going out over the ocean. Like a lot of people have been writing me, like from people who live internationally, and they're like, "Hey, I hope you're doing okay in the fires," and it's crazy because we're like a 10-minute drive away from the Pacific Palisades, but it feels like a totally different world. Like I still wake up here, sky's blue every morning. I don't smell any smoke. But then, you drive down to Santa Monica and you look west and you just see this huge cloud out over the ocean. It's terrifying.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that can change too, right? Depending on which way the wind is blowing. So yeah, I think in the first 2 or 3 days, because it's these Santa Ana winds going from east to west, that it was blowing the smoke out over the ocean. And then, of course, in this neighborhood, we started to get smoke from the other fires that are east of here.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I did have a proper gas mask with me, but I wore it some of the time. Let's put it that way.
This is crazy that you got into that building. Oh, wow. What a frame.
Again,
Jesus.
this is it's a little bit of an elevated view, and yeah, it's all smoky in the background of that photo, but that whole neighborhood was just essentially leveled. So.
It's, I mean, it's so confusing. Like, I mean, is it fair to say that every single home in the Pacific Palisades was like built out of wood and it just caught? Like, because obviously the brush and the grass and the trees in Southern California are all just like tinder waiting to go up because it's so dry here, right? And we all know that. I go hiking here every weekend, and I'm astonished at how dry all the brushes and stuff like that. But these houses went up like fast.
They went up fast, fast, some of them, yeah, and I think there's, in a few frames, there's a picture of a house that was destroyed. Maybe we could, advance a couple, see, I should say that I did start to run into some fire crews, that on Wednesday. It's probably midday sometime, and again, what they were doing is, they were trying to put out. Let me go to the next frame too, I think. Yeah, so you can see there's a house that's gonna be a total loss, right? The
Yeah.
one in the background. But there was a house next to that that hadn't caught on fire. So what this crew was doing was they were trying to put out that fire that we're looking at right now, and then kind of, you know, um, put some water on the house that was right next to it. So again, it's sort of like, they're not trying to save whole neighborhoods at this point. They're not, there would be some other areas that they might be setting up a line of defense, but this wasn't one of them. This was just one truck, and then there was another truck that came at some point to sort of help out. But this is just a crew of maybe like 4 people, really.
So at this stage, it doesn't seem like a very coordinated effort because, like, when you think about like LA County Fire Department, and you have one truck trying to save one house out of like 10,000 houses. I mean, how many houses are out in the Pacific Palisades? I mean, hundreds of thousands of people live out there, and it's just crazy that one house at a time. Like these people are putting their lives on the line to save like one house. Like that's the brutality of the job, right? Is like trying to save one house at a time.
Right, and I think that one of the things about this particular or these series of fires, it's hard to grasp without seeing it firsthand because you can see television footage or still pictures, but it's impossible to convey in any of those images really how spread out things got really in the first 24 hours. So just take one fire, which was the Palisades fire. We're not just talking about one neighborhood and then you're trying to contain it, in one neighborhood. It was, a neighborhood here and then another neighborhood a mile away and then another one a mile away after that. boom, 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 several of those. So the gist of it is that the crews get stretched really thin, and it becomes a matter of triage at some point where you realize there might be a neighborhood where it's a 90% loss. So you might have a couple of crews that are nearby, and you can then move them into that neighborhood to try to save the remaining 10% of the houses. But then there are other situations where they know that the bulk of the fire is about to come over a hill, let's say. Like there's one place called Mandeville Canyon. And so the fire department really tried to set a hard line to keep it from crossing over into and beyond Mandeville Canyon, because that would then expose all these other neighborhoods, to the fire. So they might have a large contingent of crews, both sort of LA County Fire, the people who are, like use trucks and are the regular fire department that you see. And then there are other crews that are more designed to work in the hills with less equipment, but they're trying to set up defensive lines. So it's certainly coordinated, but, at some point, it's sort of like they can only do so much. And again, this gets into budgets and politics and all that, and I just don't know enough about that to say anything about it at this point. But
Well, very responsible of you because there's a lot of people out there who don't know anything about it but want to talk about it all the time. So
yeah,
happy to just look at what you saw on the ground.
right, yeah.
All right, let's have a look here. Okay.
So this is that afternoon, Wednesday. This is what you'd call downtown Pacific Palisades. It's not a big downtown, but there are a few blocks of commercial buildings, and this is just one of them that was on fire. And yeah,
Yeah.
and we'll see a few more pictures from downtown. I mean, um, yeah, this is sort of like we're seeing almost like an entire block here of businesses that had all been burned down. The same here, same area. This is right off of Sunset Boulevard, and it's about, I would say maybe a mile from the Pacific Coast Highway.
So I mean, it's terrifying how you captured the sun in a lot of these pictures, and you really compose them, very eloquently. And but again, you can see the wind in the trees. You can see, at this stage, look how high that sun is, and you're basically getting, very limited light in there. I mean, that smoke must have been so thick.
Yeah, it was pretty thick. I mean, that's the thing, is that it's just in the air all around you, not just in the fire that's burning right in front of you, but it's like, just feels like it's in the atmosphere. And yeah, it's obviously it's very spooky walking around, these scenes. I mean, people always use the analogy, well, it's like a war zone or it's like an apocalyptic scene or something like that. And it does feel like that when you're in it. I mean, that's the best description.
Well, this photo here, that just go back a little. This one looks like it's straight out of Terminator or something like that. Like that is just freaky.
Yeah, no, it is surreal. And again, I'm just driving around this neighborhood by myself, and, hardly ever seeing anybody, occasionally coming across a colleague or a crew.
Okay, so here we have more firefighters just assessing the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Just doing, they might be searching for, someone, or just, yeah, basically doing damage assessments. That's probably a little bit later in the afternoon. And this is downtown Pac Palisades again. It's funny, I mean, I've been to Pacific Palisades, dozens or hundreds of times. Um, and I've been to downtown, and I've had lunch there a bunch. And I used to hike very close to there with a good friend of mine, and we would go there for breakfast afterwards. And so seeing it now completely level like that, it's very sad. And in a lot of cases, I don't even recognize what was there. Like I don't even remember what that building was. And it's the architecture of it is actually really quite nice. And I think I don't know what period it's from, maybe mid 20th century or something, or even older. But it's gone now.
Completely.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, geez.
Yeah. Same general area.
Yeah.
So I think these are lemons that are right. I mean, it's just one of these sort of odd scenes here. They were spared.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're moving now into the next day.
Okay.
All right.
So we're into what, Thursday So the fire's been raging now for what, like almost 36 hours?
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so then the following day, I had heard about the fire close to Pasadena in this town called Altadena, and there were a lot of very dramatic pictures on Wednesday of when I was on the west side of fires burning in people's neighborhoods and people having to flee like very quickly and just, trying to save their houses in many cases. So that was an incredibly dynamic scene, very dangerous for those people there. I think with Pac Palisades, I think one of the reasons that there weren't those kind of scenes, unfortunately, you didn't see like a high injury or death toll casualty count in Palisades, is that people left very quickly.
Mhm.
On the east side, I think that fire kicked up so fast that a lot of people just, they didn't have time to get out. So anyway, I wanted to go and see what was happening there. And for the most part, those fires were out. I mean, they were still kind of smoldering, but this is one of the, first scenes I came across. So here's a guy who's, wearing a handgun, and this is,
Is he a private citizen or was he working with the fire department?
no, he's a private citizen who just felt like he wanted to wear a handgun that day. And so his house was spared, but then he kind of went up and down his street and he looked at his neighbors' houses, and he was trying to, uh, you know, turn. I can't remember if he was trying to turn the gas off, which you're actually not really supposed to do, or what. But he was sort of just checking his neighbors' houses, and this is when there was sort of um, there was talk that there was looting happening in some of these neighborhoods.
Right.
And so what happened was after Wednesday, so there's fire evacuation orders in all different parts of the city. And sometimes it's a warning and then sometimes it's an order. So if it's a warning, it's like, get ready, you may have to get out. And if it's an order, that means you're not supposed to be in there, even if you live there. Technically, you're not supposed to stay and defend your house. A lot of people did that. A friend of mine did that with her husband, and they were able to save their house. But you're not really supposed to do that. And even when the fires are out in those neighborhoods, even today, over a week later, residents are not allowed, in many cases, to go back into those neighborhoods. So the only way that I was able to get in was because I have press passes. So the media was able to get in and do this. But there were rumors and talk that there were other people who were sneaking in, who were rummaging through this wreckage or trying to break into a house that hadn't burned up and steal stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I just read online today that the retired tennis player, Pam Shriver, she had to flee her house and she was in a hotel somewhere in LA, and some people broke into her house and stole some of her trophies. It was terrible.
Well, well, I heard that like there were some thieves that were dressing up as firefighters to get past the lines to get into houses. And then of course for the houses that didn't burn and that were forced, to be evacuated, a lot of those people still had their security cameras on and were able to see people coming into their homes stealing stuff, but they were helpless because yeah, they were in a hotel or with
Mhm.
family in some other part of the city or some other part of the state, and they have to watch their home get burglarized on their security cameras.
Oh, that's horrible, and they know that there's very little, I mean, the authorities are gonna be able to do, right? Because it's and they're just stretched too thin. So this guy, he,
Took it into his
took
own
it into his own hands.
yeah, America. Yep. Yeah. So
So this is, Altadena again, sort of self-explanatory here, but a lot of volunteers sort of, activated themselves to help out in whatever ways they could.
so I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but uh, I would say that like Pacific Palisades is like a luxury neighborhood, like a luxurious neighborhood, like it's people of a high net worth. What's Altadena like? Because I've never been out there. I don't know really much about Pasadena, Altadena, all this kind of stuff. Like, is it a similar kind of homeowner, or is it completely different socioeconomic group?
Well, it's mixed. I mean, Altadena has kind of an interesting history because Pasadena has always been nice and somewhat upscale, and it sort of has, you could almost call it like old California money. There are a lot of very old houses, the families there are very established. That's where the Rose Bowl is. Altadena is just north of that, and it is an incredibly beautiful area because it goes right up into the foothills there, which is it's close to like the entrance to the Angeles Crest National Forest. It's really beautiful, but for a long time, up until let's say maybe the early '90s, relatively speaking to other parts of LA, it wasn't as expensive. So there were working class people who could afford to buy houses there.
Hmm.
um, for I don't know, let's say 3, 4, $500,000 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And now it's not like that anymore. Just like everything else in this city, it's like $1 million practically, to buy any house anywhere in LA. I mean, I'm exaggerating somewhat, but anywhere in those areas now. So you have a mix of older families that were that established in Altadena decades ago, who may be, more a blue collar family, and then you have younger people who've moved in more recently. But it also has had a reputation of kind of a strong arts community, so that you have people who work in show business, maybe not as, top line actors, but, you have artists, I spent time with a prop master from the entertainment industry who's lived there for a long time.
Mm.
Another guy who stages like musical productions. So it's very mixed. I also happened to meet a guy who's in his 70s, I think, and he was part of a family singing group called The Waters, who they perform with Michael Jackson and a lot of famous people. So, it had a little bit of that vibe, as opposed to just, basically just very, very well-to-do people that you would run into more on the west side.
Okay. And we got
So, in fact, that's the man that I was talking about, Orrin Waters, and that's his son. So he lost his house. His sister lives right up the street. Her house was spared, but yeah, he'd lived in that house since 1979. His son in this picture grew up there. Yeah, so I have, I think, maybe 4 pictures here in a little sequence. So this was, I just stumbled upon this scene, and as I mentioned, the residents technically were not allowed to get back into these neighborhoods. So some of them did get back in because they sort of knew back streets to avoid the police or whatever, to avoid these checkpoints, or they got in some other way. So he was in there. He may have just stayed in there. I can't remember actually. But one of this firemen from Contra Costa County, which is in Northern California, his crew was tasked with sort of putting out the last embers of the fire on this guy Orrin Waters' house. And then when that was out, he just uh, asked Orrin if he wanted any help kind of going through the rubble of the house. So very generously kind of took some time to help
how
Mr. Waters do that.
how dangerous is it going through the rubbles of a house where there could still be live embers and things burning underneath all of that? Like, because I mean, in this Altadena scene where you're walking around too, like it looks like the fire's kind of done, but like, was it? I mean, did it flare back up again, or did it just move?
I mean, it was mostly done. I mean, you still would sometimes there were still some smoldering embers. So I don't think it's all that dangerous. I mean, it's not something you would ask a child to go do,
Mm-hmm.
or take your kid to go do something like that. But Waters was interesting. Everybody obviously, when they're faced with that kind of a tragedy, people are going to have a range of reactions. And his reaction was he was amazingly upbeat, and he was very gracious with the fire crew that was with him. And he thanked them afterwards, and couldn't have been nicer about the whole thing.
Mm.
So I obviously really admire somebody like that who's able to put on such a brave face in having lost so much.
Yeah, that's terrifying. I mean, yeah, I mean, I've never really seen devastation like this on any level before. I think like when you see earthquakes and stuff like that, some houses break, the streets get kind of pulled apart. Maybe there's bridges or some buildings that fall down, but it's just like the nothingness of this is terrifying.
Yeah, the nothingness of it. And I spent some time with a few other people going through the remains of their homes. And yeah, it's just remarkable how you just can't even identify much of anything at all in the house. In some cases, they pulled out maybe some pottery or something that that has some sentimental value or something. But for the most part, things are just gone.
There was one picture in the news. I don't know if you saw it either. I think I saw it on social media somewhere of a woman who just put like her valuables and her fine china and who put all this stuff in the swimming pool next to her house. And then she got the hell out of there. And the house was gone, but the stuff in the swimming
Wow,
pools.
that's great.
I don't know if any looters got to it first,
Uh-huh.
but at least like it was saved.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
All right, what do we got here?
Yeah, again, this is all Altadena. So this gives you a little bit of the sense of the geography of the place. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful setting.
Mm.
Um, um, some of it a little bit densely packed, I would say. But some, and I mean, one of the really sad things about this too, it's not just obviously for individual people and families who've lost their house and have lost everything, it's very, very sad. But it's also sort of sad on a sort of a collective, broader level because, and particularly in Altadena, a lot of these houses like were from the 20s and 30s, in some cases older. 100 years, at least 100 years old, and so they're very distinctive, like Spanish style architecture, and that's gone now. These are like landmark level properties, some of these that are now just completely lost.
And it's interesting too because like I'm really interested in understanding, like watching this from a distance, which I'm doing. I'm really quite interested in understanding where the rebuild is going to come back and whether they're going to try to rebuild in the similar style or whether they're just going to put in like cookie cutter, homes that all look the same, or whether they're going to start putting in like multifamily residences like the one I live in, like more of a rental, or whether, because like you have to think like you said, like 80, 100-year-old single family homes, like with all that character and all that architecture, like there's no way they're going to try to rebuild brick for brick what happened there. And that whole community is going to lose its, um, what makes it special.
Absolutely, it's character in a sense. Yeah, exactly.
The word I was looking for.
Yeah, right out. So, yeah, no, that's right. No, I think that's exactly right. And it remind. I mean, again, we're only a week and a half into this, so there's no way to know.
It's not over yet.
It's not over yet. How things are going to shake out in a few years, but it reminds me. Thinking about it reminds me a little bit of going to some cities in Europe that were heavily bombed during World War II,
Right.
right? And so there's a part of town that looks the way it did in the 19th century or right or older, right? But then there are other parts of town, sometimes most of the city, you can just tell has all been rebuilt since the war.
Yeah.
So it lost all that character. And that's kind of what's going to happen here.
Well, I remember I was traveling through Poland a few years ago during COVID, actually, and you can go up to like Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland, but that was completely carpet bombed during World War II. So there's nothing there. So the whole city is just kind of modern and new. But then you go south to Krakow, and Krakow was completely maintained because the Germans didn't bomb the shit out of it, and it was because Hitler loved the architecture there, and he'd been there as a child or something like that, and was so blown away by it that they left it. And when you look at the difference between like Krakow and Warsaw, it's night and day, right?
Mm.
And I think like I'm wondering like the rebuild process and how people are going to be compensated, the insurance, whether people rebuild or just sell, who buys, how they like. This is going to be one of the most interesting stories I think in Californian history.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Yes, yes, very much so. Yeah.
All right, what do we got next here?
So this is a man that I just basically stumbled upon. Just to give you a sense of what it's like to kind of be there and to take pictures. I'm in my car, or in this case, I think by that point, I think I had a rental car. And I'm just driving around and seeing one devastated block after another. Sometimes you see a particular scene, you want to get out and do something specific in that place. And then every now and then I'll come across a person, right? And in this case, it's this guy, he's walking through this rubble. And in this case, actually, he called out to me. I was like a couple houses away, And then he called out to me, and I went over and talked to him, and it turned out that he had lived in that house that you're seeing the rubble of there, and his dad had purchased that house in the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
And so he grew up on and off in that house, and yeah, and he was just stunned, and it was the first, it was the first time that he'd been back
Hmm.
since the fires. Um,
Wow.
then there are a few frames here. I at this point, I was, I spent a few days, basically 2 or 3 days, shooting pictures on my own for, and sending them to my agency, and they got out into different media sites. And then I picked up an assignment to work with a writer from CNN.com who I had worked with before, doing another tragic story in Los Angeles. But we spent a couple of days with homeowners who had lost their houses. So there were three people, three families that we spent time with, and we went back to the remains of those houses
And this lady was one of
with them, and she was one of them.
Yeah.
So she's the prop designer that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, wow.
Um,
There's just nothing there. Look at that.
yeah, I mean, just gone,
Yeah.
and so she found, I think, this is a spoon that her grandfather had given her or left, and that was just one of the few things that she found that was still, that had some significance for her.
It's fucking heartbreaking.
Mhm. And this is a woman who, she's 81 years old, and her house is burned up. She was in the home with her daughter, which I think there's a picture of her in the next frame. And so we went back with the two of them. Her daughter was with her at the time. Her daughter doesn't live in that house that got burned out, but they were together that day, that Wednesday that the fires came into Altadena. And so this is the daughter. The woman was not feeling quite up to getting out of the car, just physically walking through the remains, but her daughter did, and so I followed her daughter while she was doing that. And so that's another shot from Altadena. Just give you a sense, again, of just the scale of it. And so this is one block, right?
Mhm.
So it's block after block after block, and it's not just in one area. You might find a part of town where there's 10 square blocks that kind of look like this, and then
10 blocks.
yeah, and then you could drive a half a mile and you don't see too much damage. And then you get to another neighborhood, and then it's another 10 blocks that looks like that. So that's why it's just impossible in any single image or even a sequence of footage to sort of convey. I think the best, in some ways, like, just thinking of it purely visually, there's sort of two types of photographs or imagery that I think of that kind of describe it best. And one is where someone is taking a video of them driving down the street.
Mhm.
I think I did that a little bit, but I've seen a couple interesting videos of that where you just see, boom, 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 just the range of it, and then aerials or drone images.
Well, just as an aside on that, like the drones have been a huge problem, right? Because people have been flying private, personal drones up over the fires and getting in the way of helicopters and planes trying to douse out the flames. So the
Yeah.
drone situation here has been out of control.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I heard that in the first couple days there was a plane that got hit by a drone or ran into a drone or whatever, a firefighting plane, and had to get, you know, had to go back to base or whatever to get repaired, which is terrible. So, the FAA, I have a drone license for the FAA, and the reason why I haven't flown a drone is that the FAA has a temporary flight restriction over all this area for that reason. So it doesn't interfere with the firefighting efforts. But some people have just taken their drone up anyway. And I know in the case of the drone that hit the plane, I know the FBI found the wreckage of that drone, and they are investigating to figure out who that person is. So I hope they get nailed.
That's crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, what do we got now? Oh, shit.
Okay, so after a couple days doing that assignment in Altadena, I then was did another assignment for Die Zeit, a German weekly newspaper. Just sort of like time, it means time in German. And so I was working with a writer again, and we were focusing on one particular neighborhood that was pretty well to do, that had some private firefighting teams that were hired by residents. So most of that neighborhood was okay, that particular street.
Mhm.
So I was with them for a little bit, and but then I had really the first chance to go out to the Pacific Coast Highway and see what the damage was like along the highway.
Now, is this Malibu or is this still Pacific
Oh,
Palisades? Because I think people are
mhm.
confused where it starts and where it
Yeah,
ends.
I would say that this is now Malibu, right? So I don't know exactly where the line starts between the Palisades and Malibu. Malibu is its own city.
Mhm.
Palisades is part of LA, but at some point after you sort of get past Sunset Boulevard, right around Topanga Canyon, is probably where it turns into Malibu. So yeah, again, this is just a stretch here, beachfront property. Probably these are all houses, private houses. Obviously very expensive.
Yeah.
You're right on the beach.
This is some of the most exclusive and sought after real estate in the United States.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yes,
And it just got torched.
torched. And so you can see. I mean, so yeah, and the next frame. This is in the Palisades. Yeah, you can see this bizarre, surreal scene on the left, and the place on the right looks like it doesn't have a scratch on it. I mean, it's just, that's the most a stark example of that phenomenon.
Is it
that
is
I
it
saw.
just because the materials of the buildings were different, or like one was new and maybe had some fire retardant paint or a fire retardant roof? Like did you kind of pick up on any of those? Like,
I think it's because of the materials. I
Mm.
mean, that the house on the right is made mostly of concrete, I guess, or yeah, and yeah, maybe the roof, very fire retardant roof, and I don't know the house on the left what the roof was, but yeah, it was probably just a whole different kind of, it's probably made out of wood or something.
that's
So
crazy. Just two
yeah,
two houses side by side and
right.
nothing but luck.
Yes, yeah, but luck and and the materials of the house. So right, and then this is right at the intersection of Topanga Canyon Boulevard. So there's a road that goes through the canyon, which is about like a 20-minute drive if you're going from the San Fernando Valley.
I go hiking there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Now it's a great place to hike. There's so many beautiful hikes in that area. There's a lot of state parks,
Mhm.
and so this is right at the end of Topanga Canyon where it meets the PCH. And there was this cool store there that sold like a lot of outdoor furniture and stuff like that. And these Buddhas were
Garden Buddhas.
is that the name of it?
No, I don't.
Or those are garden Buddhas. Okay. Yeah, no, those are garden Buddhas. Yeah, so that's like one of the only thing that's still standing there.
Made of stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh my God.
Yeah, so
Look
this
at
is
that.
yeah, no, this is just mind-boggling. And now this is the remains of what was, I guess you would call it a mobile home park, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the proper name for it is, but that's the type of structures that were there. So there are probably like, I don't know, at least 100 of them out. Probably about 100 of them.
Gone.
I'm guessing just gone, wiped out.
Mhm. And sorry, I know a little bit. Oh, wait, hold on. I know a little bit about some of these. Getting the remotes here a little confused. I know some things about these mobile home parks. So a lot of these mobile home parks are mobile homes that don't have vehicles attached to them. So they would
Yes.
be like what they would call like semi-permanent, but you can attach them to something and move them. But a lot of the residents just don't have them. So if they had to evacuate, like it's just like leaving a normal home. Like that's gone.
Exactly. I mean, for all practical purposes, they were just essentially permanent, semi-permanent structures there. Yeah, it's not like a camper. It's
Mhm.
not like that's what these were. These were like, yeah, they were just technically a mobile home, but it might be a two-bedroom structure, right? And so, yeah, a lot of those people, I think they would own those homes, and then they would pay rent to live in that place. The rent would cover, the space, and it would cover utilities or whatever. I'm not sure.
Such a beautiful
But
spot. You're right on the
an
water.
incredible spot,
Yeah.
an incredible spot. So these are, you know, uh, it's technically a mobile home, but it's not like it would be cheap to live there,
Mhm.
But a lot of these people is probably, everything they had was in those structures.
It's terrifying. Like, can you imagine being in one of those mobile homes and you're like, I'm living the dream. Like, I'm in Malibu or I'm on the
Yes.
Pacific Palisades. I can walk to the ocean.
Yes.
I go for walks along the beach every morning. And then you wake up one day and there's a fire. And the scary thing about this is I kind of know where this is. And if you go north, you go to Malibu. And if you go south, you go, back into Santa Monica. Like, And if there's a fire raging, like, how do you know which way to go?
Yeah, exactly, and you only had 2 options in that case, is to go north or south on the PCH, like, 'cause it was clear, like, that taking any of those canyon roads would be totally perilous. So that yeah, I think probably most of them went south, at that point, but, no, it's horrific. You can only imagine when that thing it's probably at night on that first night that this area was lost,
Yeah.
so
Well, that's our last photo.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you for coming in and sharing that. Like,
of course.
I mean, so for the audience, like this all kind of broke out last week, Tuesday. Today it's Friday the 17th. So that would have been last Tuesday would have been what
The
the
7th, I think, or 7th or 8th.
yeah, 7th or 8th. So I mean, and the fires are still raging.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're under mostly under control at this point, and, that the thing about LA is that they're large parts of the city where it just looks like a city, where it's very dense, but where you get kind of around the perimeter of it, kind of like in Altadena, and then Pacific Palisades, you get these neighborhoods that then start to abut the mountains. And so the mountains, the Santa Monica mountain range, it goes far. It goes like, up the coast and kind of like into the San Fernando Valley and beyond. And I it's much less densely populated in a lot of those areas as you move north and west from the city of LA. So the fires can still be raging in those areas, but they don't threaten neighborhoods in the same way that they did last week, where they were basically the fires started and blew right into these very densely populated areas. So I think right now, I don't think there are any neighborhoods that are in any kind of immediate danger as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did you see the remains of any people who couldn't get out? I mean, did you see? I mean, I mean, the thing that surprises me the most is how low the death toll is. I think the
yeah.
death toll as of yesterday or today was maybe like 26 or 28 or something like that.
Right. I didn't see anybody who didn't make it out, and I completely agree with you on the. I mean, as horrible as the death toll is compared to what it might have been, and considering the number of structures that were lost and the number of people that were in danger in the first 24 hours, it's it's remarkable. Yeah, the people were able to get out, but it was obviously very harrowing for them.
So, I mean, a lot of your work all around the world, you've worked everywhere. You've worked globally. You've worked in wars. You've kind of done it all. Like, what does it feel like photographing kind of where you live, like your hometown? Like you've lived in LA since the late '80s. This is your home. You travel globally for work from here. I mean, what does it feel like watching all this kind of unfold in your backyard?
Well, it's very sad. I mean, more than anything, and it does feel historic. I mean, since I moved here in the late '80s, there have been a series of events that have kind of become national and let's say international news. And this I put on in the same at the same level as the LA riots in '92 and then the LA earthquake in '94. It feels historic. A lot of things changed after the riots. Just the way the city operated and the kind of development that was sort of encouraged and facilitated in certain parts of the city after '92 really kind of changed the character of the city. The city came back from the earthquake relatively quickly in '94. I mean, that was bad, but in some ways, I think the damage of this event is much more extensive
Mhm.
than it was from the earthquake. I think a lot more people have lost their homes. And so it just remains to be seen now how these places are going to be rebuilt. And I mean, one of my favorite things to do just on a day off is to ride my motorcycle along the PCH, go in Malibu and have lunch or something. And, the feeling of that now has completely changed. So I feel incredibly fortunate compared to so many people now that nothing bad happened to me. But certainly just being a citizen of this city, you know that there's a before and there will be an after this, and those two things are going to be very different.
When you were on the ground, photographing all this stuff over the last few days, like, did you hear people saying things, or you hear firefighters talking about things? Like, was there any chatter about, how this could have happened or why this could have happened? Because it looked like in a lot of your photos, you're pretty much on your own,
Mhm.
and you might have found a few homeowners here and there, but did they, and that one man specifically that you had met, like he was in such a thankful attitude, and was kind of really thankful for the firefighters that were there helping him kind of go through the rubbish. But I'm just wondering, like, if you picked up anything or heard anything that can shed light on just kind of how anything like this could even happen.
I can't say that I have. The people that I've talked to, uh, everyone is really so focused on the immediate task in front of them. And so I think it's too early to get these kind of broader views, or at least when you're on the ground.
Mhm.
People are more concerned about, uh, just getting. I mean, one of the guys that I photographed for the CNN story, literally, he didn't have any other clothes or any other shoes wherever he was the day of the fire. Like, he didn't have anything else with him, so everything got burned up.
Mhm.
Like, that was it. The clothes on his back and the shoes on his feet was basically all he had, and his car, I think. And so, his concern is like, oh, okay, find something else, right? I got to find something else to wear or whatever. And so that's sort of, or you find somebody who's just, um, just despondent over, losing their homes. So those kind of broader questions, I think, just haven't come up yet. They will, obviously, but
Mhm.
not yet.
I mean, it's hard to speculate, and I'm actually in the process of trying to get someone on the podcast who actually has lost their home, and I really want to ask them a lot of questions because, like, for me, if I was living out in the Palisades and my house had burned down and I narrowly escaped with my pets and my passport and whatever else I could throw into a backpack, and then I went back and my house was completely gone, there's no fucking way I would move back there. Like, insurance, rebuild, sell, get the hell. Like, I would probably be so traumatized I'd have to leave the state.
Right. And that's a big question now. Just the right, I mean, there's the practical aspect of it, like insurance. Like, are these companies going to continue to insure people to rebuild in places that, not just these fires, but in some other cases like in Malibu, you've got floods and mudslides and all that stuff, and just it's um and then, yeah, and then there's just the personal feeling about it. Like, do you wanna go back to an area that you know is just kind of inherently dangerous? So I think there's just gonna be a range of outcomes there. There's some people are gonna say, "Nah, I just wanna build my house again," and they may have means to self-insure. Maybe they've got tens of millions of dollars, and so they're just gonna build a house, and if it burns down again, they feel like they can cover themselves if they can't get insurance. So whereas on the other end, then there are people who probably maybe didn't even have insurance,
Mhm.
and so they're just gonna be, trying to find an apartment somewhere, and you're already hearing about just LA, which is an expensive place to live with anyway. Now it's just the housing is just gonna become you've got tens of thousands of people who are now looking for a permanent place to live, and they're now staying in hotels. They can afford it, or they're staying with family or friends, but eventually they're gonna need somewhere else to stay. So, yeah, you have all this pressure now on the whole city on that regard.
I've heard there's
Yeah.
been a lot of price gouging too, with like people jacking up rents and like Airbnb properties, like prices going through the roof, just trying to, benefit as much as possible from this tragedy.
Yeah, which is really shitty, and I mean, there's some laws against doing that, so you hope that the city, the county, the state, or whatever it is will crack down on that stuff, but we'll see.
Now, I mean, as a professional photographer, you're kind of always looking for interesting subjects to build stories around. You've published a lot of books and things like that. Do you think this is a story that you're going to want to stick with and kind of watch it play out over the next few months or years? Like, is it something that, because I remember, you were, from 20, you covered the run up to Trump's election win. You covered the January 6th event at the Capitol building. You've always been kind of very interested in politics. You've gone back and done the Republican Democratic National Conventions. That's been like a real thread for you. And the photography coming out of that has been just spectacular. Like, is this something that you feel like you're gonna wanna stick with and keep telling this story?
Yes, I think so, especially living here, and so sort of feeling personally invested, and having the knowledge of the city. Yeah, it is very interesting to me, what's gonna happen. So I hope to, that I'll be here and that I'll continue to follow things. It's just I really have no idea how things are going to shake out at this point. I think the city. I mean, I am still somewhat in shock, and I think the city is at large is still in a state of shock.
Yeah.
But these questions are going to come up now in the next months and years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just it's wild, like there was a post going around on LinkedIn the other day, and I saw it and I chipped in with a comment and stuff like that. But people were just saying obviously the whole world has had a tough couple of years, right? Whether you're talking about war or and the COVID, the pandemic and things like that. But like LA seems to have had a really tough kind of 4 or 5 years here, because you think like COVID shut down everything in 2021 and a bit of 2022. Then we had a writer strike and an actor strike. And now we have wildfires, and to even think about work with so many homeless people, it was such a disaster, is really difficult. But at the same time, LA has to entertain the world, right?
Mhm.
Like, and you just think like there's so many people that were waiting for things to get better, to get
Yes,
back into work, to get back into
that's
jobs.
right.
And this, like, everyone in this town is connected in some way, shape, or form to the storytelling or the entertainment industry. And this just seems like another terrible natural disaster kind of roadblock to people just getting back to living a normal life again.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're right. After the writer's strike a year and a half ago, it did put a lot of people out of work. I mean, and even when the strikes were over, and like you said, because of COVID, it's just Hollywood has been slow to return to the production level that it had before COVID,
Hmm.
and so now this is just another bad blow, right, to the city, and just a lot of people now who are going to have to reevaluate whether they want or can live here. So, yeah, yeah,
You think about all the writers, the animators,
mhm,
the grips, the people who work on set, the people who do hair and makeup, like,
right,
not forget about the stars that have
right,
4 or 5 homes, like
yeah.
the working people of the film industry that are just devastated. And how can they even think about getting back to work when they're living in their brother or sister's apartment and they've got 2 kids that like can't even go to school? Like the amount of schools that went up was ridiculous.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, exactly. I know it's life-changing for, tens of thousands of people at least, at a minimum, probably hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything you saw out there, or that you want to talk about that we haven't kind of gone through yet?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I think we've gone through a lot. I mean, I just, in these kind of tragedies, it's, the big picture is very, very sad, but it is, seeing these very small moments that are touching, the personal moments. That's kind of usually what sticks with me. One of them, the woman that we saw towards the end of the slides, who sort of a close up of her face. Um, Right, her, she when I was with her, she had, like, one kinda, like, permanent cat who lived with her, and then she fed a couple of feral cats, and so she found the remains of one of the cat that was living with her, so that's very sad when I was with her, and, yeah, it's just, like, little things like that that sort of get to you, and then on sort of the positive side, when I was with the singer and he was with the fireman, who was helping him out, and they were just so kind with each other, right? And so finding that kind of, people trying to make the best of a really shitty situation,
Yeah.
that again is it's very heartwarming. So you sort of have the range of experiences when you're in the middle of all that.
Yeah. Because I remember how devastating it was when I met you and we were covering the China earthquake in 2008, because there were just fucking bodies everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
just, and it was horrifying. And here, again, like, people for the most part didn't get physically injured or lose their lives, but it's just the property and the devastation of people's lives. Like,
Hmm.
without, I mean, if you could do something to someone or a neighborhood without killing them, and it would be the worst thing you could do, this is it.
Yeah, that's sad but correct, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just a
absolutely.
joke.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Terrifying. Well, I hope, I hope that some of this starts to get resolved at
Mm,
some stage and people can start moving back into their homes or start rebuilding their lives. I mean, when you think about it, it's just going to take years for this to even play out.
Yes, years for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I really liked that. Sorry, I was just trying to go back and find this one photo that really, for me, captured it, and I just can't seem to find it here. Hold on. Let's go back to this. And the human element of this is, like the stories that are going to come out of this haven't even, because the fires are still raging, right? So no one's even, this one to me is the one that,
Mm.
captures, in my mind, the loss of lifestyle property,
Right.
because you're up on this little ledge, you're up on this little ridge, you can see the car, you can see just endless amounts of smoke and destruction. I think, like, for me, that's so telling of what we're all seeing in the news at the moment.
Mm. Right. And it shows you, if you'd been in that neighborhood 24 hours before, you would have thought, "Oh, this is great. This is just like paradise here."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And no inkling whatsoever that something like this could happen, that a day later it would look like a bomb had been dropped there, right? So it really speaks to the fragility of so many different things.
Everything
right?
we hold dear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that you just can't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's true. Well, David, thank you again for coming back on the podcast and sharing your photographic work. I'm always happy to have you back. You're always doing amazing things here in a terribly difficult situation.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having me on in this difficult time.
No worries. And
Yeah.
stay safe out there if you go back out.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
All right.
And we're out.
Okay.